In 1964, doctors opened John Wayne's chest and removed his entire left lung along with 2 ribs because of cancer. For anyone else, that would have been the end. But for the man America had grown used to seeing as a walking block of stone, the grim news only made the legend grow larger. The public saw a John Wayne who still stood up, still stepped into the light, still spoke as if death were just another opponent to be faced head-on. But from that very moment, a cold truth began to emerge. The man who so often played those who never knew fear had to spend the rest of his life locked in a relentless battle with his own body. John Wayne was not merely a movie star. He was the image America once used to define strength, masculinity, and pride. From footsteps that struck the desert dust like hammers to the steely gaze beneath a cowboy hat, and he made millions believe that some men were born never to fall. Yet behind that stance lay a life far from as straight as the western horizon. A young man nearly cast aside by Hollywood, a man who rose from years of struggle, an icon revered but also surrounded by controversy, illness, and fractures that could not be mended. The closer one comes to John Wayne, the clearer the most unsettling paradox of his life becomes. He spent his entire career portraying the immortal, while in reality, he suffered, failed, and endured loss like any other human being. And perhaps it is that distance between the two versions of him that tells the true story. Before the name John Wayne became a symbol that all of America trusted, he was simply a boy named Marion Robert Morrison, a name that suggested nothing of power or legend. He was born on May 26, 1907, in Winterset, Iowa, into a family that was not wealthy, but stable enough for a child to grow up without thinking too much about the future. From the moment he was born, he was already different. His unusually large weight made his name appear in the local newspaper. But that difference was not a sign of glory. It felt more like a vague premonition that his life would not follow predictable, straight lines. The early years passed without stage lights, without an audience, only a family gradually losing the certainty it once had. When his father's work failed, the entire family was forced to leave Iowa and move to Glendale, California. So the change was not loud, but it was enough for a child to understand that everything could disappear without warning. From that point on, stability was no longer something to take for granted. It became something to hold on to or to accept losing. In Glendale, Marion was not a boy who stood out in the way people imagine a future star. He was more attached to his Airedale Terrier, also named Duke, than to any grand dreams. The two shadows moved together through the streets, so much so that local firefighters began calling them Big Duke and Little Duke. The name Duke stayed, not because it was chosen to impress, but because it was simply the only thing that felt naturally connected to him. As he grew older, the only thing that gave him a sense of control over his life was sports. He played football with the seriousness of someone who believed it was the only path out of an ordinary existence. A scholarship to the University of Southern California was not just an educational opportunity, it was a promise that he could become someone else. But that promise did not last. Thus, a shoulder injury during a body surfing incident ended everything, without warning, without a chance to fix it. The scholarship disappeared, and the one clear path vanished with it. With no backup plan, no second dream, Marion Morrison stepped into his early adulthood carrying a void that was difficult to name. He did not seek out cinema out of passion, nor did he enter Hollywood with ambitions of becoming a star. He simply needed a job, any direction that would allow him to keep moving forward. And from that randomness, another journey began. A journey that even he, at that moment, could not have known would transform him into John Wayne. With no clear dream to guide him, Marion Morrison entered Hollywood in the simplest way possible, a job to survive. At Fox Studios, he was not an actor, had no dressing room of his own, no name on any casting board. He carried props, cleaned, did whatever he was assigned for a wage just enough to sustain a life. Long days passed in the smell of wood, metal, and studio dust, where the lights fell on others while he stood at the edge, observing. The first time he appeared on camera, he was only a football player passing through the frame, nameless, without imprint. But it was precisely from that position that he learned to see cinema from the inside. How a scene was constructed, how a face could gain weight simply through light and silence. Amid those anonymous days, John Ford appeared like a slight deviation, but one enough to change the trajectory. Ford did not hand him a leading role, did not promise anything specific, but he saw in Marion something others overlooked, a presence that, without effort, gave the frame weight. It was not acting technique, but the way he stood, the way he looked, the way he moved, as if always carrying an untold story. Ford began to pull him closer to the camera, little by little, shaping everything from his name to his image. Duke Morrison gradually disappeared, and John Wayne was formed, not as a role, but as a human structure suited to the kind of cinema Ford believed in, rigid, minimal, without excess words. Opportunity arrived faster than preparation. In 1930, Wayne was given the lead role in The Big Trail, a major project with ambitions to usher in a new era of widescreen cinema. This was no longer small frames or faint supporting roles. It was a film that placed him at the center, forcing him to carry the entire weight of the story. But cinema does not operate on the logic of individual effort. Audiences were not ready for the new technology, theater systems had not adapted, and the film failed. Not because Wayne lacked ability, but because the timing was not on his side. In a single moment, he was pulled back to his old position, even lower, as if the dream he had just touched was taken away immediately. The years that followed had no glow, only exhausting repetition. From the early 1930s until before 1939, and he was held in a chain of low-budget westerns, where shooting schedules were compressed, scripts were simple, and everything had to be completed so quickly there was no room for error. Some films were finished in just a few days, with simple meals between takes and paychecks that could not create any sense of stability. He was boxed in, seen as a convenient option rather than a talent worth investing in. At times, the idea of leaving cinema was not failure, but a way out of a loop with no exit. Yet it was precisely that seemingly meaningless period that quietly shaped everything that came later. The way he rode a horse without display, the way he walked with a slow but steady rhythm, the way he spoke little yet carried weight in every line. All of it was honed through dozens of films no one remembered. He did not become John Wayne in a single explosive moment. He became John Wayne in the days no one saw, when everything around him suggested he could be replaced at any time. That near decade of repetition did not end with a promise, but with a gamble. When John Ford decided to make Stagecoach in 1939, he did not seek a familiar face to guarantee box office success. He wanted someone he believed could stand firm within the vast Western frame. The studio thought otherwise. They wanted Gary Cooper, a name with proven commercial value. And Wayne, with the failure of The Big Trail behind him and dozens of B-movies to his name, was not a safe choice. The struggle unfolded not in the press but within internal decisions where an actor could be replaced in a single meeting. Ford did not step back. When the cameras began to roll, the pressure was not in the dialogue, but in Wayne having to prove he deserved that protection. His first appearance, when the character Ringo Kid is introduced, lasted only a few seconds. A zoom, a man standing in the desert, a gun in hand, eyes looking straight into the lens. But those few seconds had to be filmed over and over again. Not because of technique, but because Wayne understood clearly. If he could not hold this moment, everything before it would become meaningless. When the final take was kept, the audience no longer saw an actor trying. They saw a character that had always existed. Stagecoach did not merely succeed. It changed Wayne's position within the Hollywood system overnight. The film received 7 Oscar nominations and won 2, and its revenue far exceeding expectations for a project that had been doubted from casting. The man who once lived through nameless roles now became the first face mentioned when speaking of the Western genre. Without needing many films to confirm it, Wayne stepped directly into the ranks of A-list stars with a fully formed image. Not something still an experiment, but something already accepted. From that point on, his choices were no longer about whether he would get roles, but about ensuring that image would not be broken. The characters he took on began to revolve around the same axis. Cowboys, soldiers, men of action. Few words, no explanations, no hesitation. He did not try to transform himself for each script. He made the script adapt to him. Every step, every way he lifted a gun, every silence between lines was kept consistent to the point that audiences did not need to distinguish characters. They only needed to recognize John Wayne, and that was enough. At the same time, however, a fracture began to form, not in his career, but in how he was perceived. When World War II broke out, Hollywood changed its rhythm, and the faces on screen became symbols of national spirit. Wayne, and with his already defined image of soldier and hero, naturally became a representative of an ideal the public believed in. The only thing was, he did not appear on the battlefield. The decision to stay behind, though shaped by many factors, gradually became a question he could not control. The man who shot enemies on screen did not step into the real war alongside others. The spotlight did not disappear because of that. Films continued to be produced, audiences still filled theaters, the image was reinforced with every role. But behind that stability, a quiet contradiction stretched on, between the man the public wanted to believe in and the man who had to live with his own choices. Once the image had been established, the pressure no longer lay in being recognized, but in proving that he was not merely a symbol constructed from camera angles and lighting. The late 1940s forced John Wayne to step outside his own safe zone, and Red River in 1948 was one of the rare moments he accepted that challenge. The character Thomas Dunson was no longer a straightforward hero with clear lines between right and wrong. He was a stubborn, authoritarian man, willing to push everything too far. Wayne's gaze in this film did not only look outward, it began to turn inward. The tension between power and solitude was visible in every scene, allowing audiences for the first time to see a version of him that was not easily predictable. Just 1 year later, Sands of Iwo Jima placed him in a different environment, no longer the West, but the battlefield. The role of Sergeant Stryker required not only a hardened exterior, but a different kind of pressure, leadership, control, and responsibility for the lives of those around him. The filming process was not softened for safety. Real fire, real explosives, blasts that did not wait for actors to react in time. At one point, an explosion knocked him unconscious for an extended period, forcing the production to halt. But when the film was completed, the audience did not see the incident. They saw a soldier rendered with such authenticity that the boundary between performance and experience seemed erased. The role earned him his first Academy Award nomination, and at the same time, firmly tied the image of John Wayne to war, to national spirit, to a kind of heroism that America wanted to believe in at that moment. Alongside these roles that expanded his range, his relationship with John Ford continued to pull him along a different trajectory, harsher, more personal. Rio Grande in 1950 and The Quiet Man in 1952 were not merely successful films. They were spaces where Wayne was forced to confront his own limits. Ford did not reduce pressure simply because Wayne had become a star. On the contrary, he demanded more. Scenes repeated to exhaustion, corrections made in front of the entire crew, moments where patience was continuously tested. Wayne did not resist in any obvious way. He accepted that pressure as part of the process, as if understanding that without sufficient force, the image he carried would become hollow. By the time of The Searchers in 1956, and everything was pushed to a point where even audiences familiar with John Wayne could no longer remain in a safe zone. Ethan Edwards was not a hero to be admired in a simple way. He carried obsession, extremity, a fury that stretched across every frame. Wayne did not soften this character. He preserved its uncomfortable edges, allowing it to exist exactly as it was. The film did not receive recognition proportional to its significance at the time of its release, but over time it has come to be seen as one of the most important works of the Western genre. And there, John Wayne was no longer a symbol standing above the story. He became part of the story itself, with all the complexity he had rarely allowed to surface before. As his power within the industry grew, Wayne no longer accepted simply standing before the camera and waiting for others' decisions. Batjack Productions became the tool through which he could exert greater control, from selecting scripts to shaping how characters were built. Roles that did not align with the image he had constructed began to be refused, even when they came from major projects. That was not limitation, but a conscious choice to preserve the John Wayne that audiences believed in. Yet each such decision also narrowed his creative space, forcing him to balance between protecting that image and the need to evolve so as not to fall behind. Once he had gained control over his image and position in Hollywood, John Wayne no longer wanted to stand inside a story written by others, and he wanted to create his own story, one large enough to match the stature he believed he had reached. The Alamo was that dream. It was not just a project, but something he carried for years, to the point that when he finally began, he refused any compromise. He directed, produced, and stood in front of the camera, and more importantly, he put his own personal assets into it. His house, his cars, everything accumulated from an entire career became part of the wager for a single film. What was built did not resemble an ordinary set. A nearly complete version of the Alamo was reconstructed, every historical detail carefully crafted, from structure to materials. Thousands of extras, thousands of horses, shooting days stretched under a brutal heat that erased the boundary between acting and endurance. There was no way to scale the film down, just as there was no way for Wayne to retreat once he had gone too far. When the film premiered, it received 7 Oscar nominations, an undeniable recognition. But the revenue was not enough to offset the massive cost he had poured into it. Numbers did not reflect ambition, and ambition did not protect him from disappointment. And not being nominated in the Best Director category made the fracture more visible. A project he considered his personal peak failed to bring the validation he had expected. What followed was no longer explosive, but shifted into a form of stability marked by fatigue. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Hatari, The Longest Day, then Donovan's Reef. Films that still carried appeal, still maintained Wayne's position in the box office system, but no longer felt like forward movement. There, he resembled a man who had reached the summit and was forced to keep walking across the same flat plane, while his body and time began to pull him backward. Scenes lasted longer, movements grew heavier, and the silences between them were no longer merely choices of performance. By 1964, the one thing he had always controlled, his image, was placed into a situation beyond control: lung cancer. Those around him wanted silence, because a symbol could not be associated with illness if it was to remain intact. But Wayne did not follow that path. The surgery to remove one lung and two ribs was not just a medical decision. It was a direct confrontation with the image he had built. When he returned without hiding, without slowing his work, the public did not see weakness. They saw another version of the same man, still standing, but now standing against something invisible. He began appearing in cancer awareness campaigns, turning personal experience into part of his public image, as if pulling the illness into the very story he had been telling for years. In the years that followed, and every appearance of his carried two layers: the man the audience recognized, and the body struggling to keep pace with that image. When the script for True Grit reached him, his first reaction was not excitement. He saw his own age in the character, saw clearly what he had lost, and understood that this role could not hide it. And precisely because of that, it became something he could not ignore. Rooster Cogburn did not need to be perfect. He needed to exist with all his roughness, fatigue, and stubbornness. The filming process was far from easy. Terrain, weather, altitude, all placed additional strain on Wayne's body. There were moments when he had to rely on an oxygen tank between takes. Yet when the camera rolled, no trace of that was allowed to appear. The audience saw only a vivid, energetic character, with one eye covered yet still observing the world with familiar sharpness. When the film was released, it was not only a commercial success, but also brought him the Academy Award for Best Actor, the only Oscar of his career. That moment did not feel like a sudden victory. It felt like a long-delayed acknowledgement, arriving only after everything had been paid for in full, to the point where nothing more needed to be proven. The late arrival of the Oscar did not slow the pace of the era's transformation. Entering the 1970s, and John Wayne remained a name that could draw audiences to theaters, still the familiar face of stories about honor, loyalty, and uncompromising strength. But around him, American cinema had shifted direction. Characters were becoming more complex, darker, even contradictory to the very values Wayne had once represented. Heroes no longer needed to be perfect, no longer had to stand upright at the center with light cast upon them. And within that change, Wayne's image began to stand slightly out of alignment with the new current. His loyal audience remained, still turning to him as a familiar anchor in a Hollywood that had become increasingly unpredictable. But that loyalty was no longer enough to keep him in the position he once held. Each new role felt like a step out of an old world, where everything had once been clear, into a space where even he did not fully belong. It was not that he had grown weaker, but that the system of values around him had shifted. What once made him monumental now made him isolated in a different way. Not forgotten, but placed outside the center. When The Shootist appeared in 1976, it did not come as an opportunity, but as a coincidence too precise to ignore. An aging gunman, carrying cancer within him, knowing time was running out, forced to confront how his story would end. There was no longer any distance between role and man, and no protective layer of image. What unfolded on screen was almost a direct reflection of what Wayne himself was experiencing beyond it. His physical condition at that time no longer allowed for easy filming. Each working day became a negotiation between body and will. There were moments he had to pause to regain his breath, movements that no longer held the same flexibility. Yet when the camera ran, he did not allow any sign of weakness to enter the frame. Not because he needed to prove anything, but because he understood clearly that what the audience had attached to him could not be broken at the final moment. Even the way the story ended was not left untouched. When the script placed the character into a death that did not align with the image he had built over a lifetime, Wayne intervened, not to change the fate, but to change how it happened. That man could leave, but not in a way that would make everything before it feel untrue. And when the film closed, the audience did not simply see a character reaching the end of his journey. They saw a man writing the final passage of his own life, without noise, without justification, yet clear enough that no further explanation was needed. Just as the story on screen began to close with The Shootist, where a man chose to face his end in silence, memory pulled backward to a time when John Wayne was not yet a name recognized by all of America, when he was still Marion Morrison, a young man trying to find his place between Hollywood and his own life. He met Josephine Alicia Science in the early 1930s, in an environment completely different from the dusty world of film sets. She was the daughter of a wealthy Catholic family, raised in discipline, standards, and protection. He, on the other hand, was a man struggling to find a foothold in an unstable industry, living on temporary jobs with nothing guaranteed for the future. That difference did not stop them from moving closer to each other. Josephine saw in him a man with determination and potential, while Wayne saw in her a form of stability his life had never known at that point. They married in 1933, when Wayne's career was still uncertain. There was no aura of glamour surrounding their marriage in those early years, only long days when he left home to film, small projects that did not bring much income, and a family beginning to take shape while the foundation remained unsteady. Their first child, Michael, was born in 1934, followed by Mary Antonia in 1936, Patrick in 1939, and Melinda in 1940. 4 children arrived during a period when Wayne was still trying to keep both his career and his family from slipping out of control. The shift came when Stagecoach placed him in a position he had never held before. Filming schedules grew denser, trips became longer, and public attention began to intrude into private space. Josephine remained there, in the house with 4 children, and while Wayne moved between sets and cities, drifting further from the rhythm they once shared. The distance was not only geographical, it was the way the two of them began living in entirely different worlds. One rooted in stability that needed to be preserved, the other in a life accelerating without a clear stopping point. Extramarital relationships began to appear during this time, not as sudden shocks, but as consequences of a prolonged misalignment. Among them, Marlene Dietrich was not merely a passing name. When the two met while working on 7 Sinners in the late 1930s, the connection quickly moved beyond professional boundaries. The times Wayne sought her out after filming, the nights that stretched beyond schedules, the periods when he disappeared from family life were no longer things that could be hidden. This relationship did not happen in a moment. It extended, repeated itself, and gradually became a parallel part of the marriage he was still trying to maintain. Josephine was not someone who could accept that as part of life. The hurt did not come from a single moment, but accumulated through each absence, each insufficient explanation, then each silence that grew longer between them. When one person tried to hold on to what they had, while the other was increasingly pulled away by another world, every effort became fragmented, unable to meet at the same point. Trying to preserve a marriage built on initial trust was no longer enough to fill the space that had formed. In 1945, they officially divorced. There was no loud collapse, but there was nothing left to hold on to either. The children remained as the only thread connecting them, while each moved in a different direction. For Wayne, it marked a transition from a man trying to build both family and career into one whose career began to consume everything else. For Josephine, it meant leaving a life she had tried to preserve with everything she had, but could not pull back once it had drifted too far from where it began. After their marriage ended, his relationship with Dietrich did not stop immediately. It continued for several more years like a momentum that had not yet faded, before it quieted down in a way that had no clear boundary. There was no recorded moment of parting, no decisive break, just two people gradually moving away from the center of each other's lives, leaving behind a period long enough to reshape the entire emotional trajectory of John Wayne. Before the void left by the breakup had time to settle, another relationship appeared with a speed that left almost no time for reflection. Esperanza Chata Bauer entered John Wayne's life in 1946, at a moment when he was already a star, accustomed to attention and still carrying fractures that had not healed from his previous marriage. Bauer was younger, from Mexico, strong-willed, emotionally direct, and not inclined to yield. The initial attraction did not lie in stability, but in intensity, a kind of feeling that was fast, heated, and difficult to control. The wedding took place within the same year, 1946, with almost no pause for the two to truly understand each other before stepping into a shared life. The early days were not without connection, but the way they reacted to emotions quickly shifted everything. Bauer did not accept standing behind Wayne's spotlight, nor did she easily overlook signs she interpreted as betrayal. Suspicion did not arise from a single event. It seeped into small details, schedules, late returns, the names of women appearing in Wayne's work. As he continued working with female co-stars, especially during the filming of Angel and the Bad Man in 1947, those thoughts began to erupt into visible conflict. The intensity of the relationship did not diminish over time. It escalated. Arguments no longer stopped at words. One night, when Wayne returned home after a party, and Bauer, in a state of loss of control, held a gun and confronted him at the door. No shot was fired, but that moment was enough to reveal how far everything had gone. Fear was no longer hidden. It became part of daily life. What had begun as attraction turned into a cycle of tension that neither of them could ease. The years that followed did not bring stability. Conflicts repeated, trust was never restored, and the distance grew harder to close. By 1954, they officially divorced. Nothing remained except the traces of a relationship that had consumed too much energy to survive. What remained after the separation from Esperanza was not relief, but a silence carrying clear exhaustion. A man who had gone through two relationships marked by two different forms of conflict, and who began to understand that emotion, if not kept in balance, could break any structure. When Pilar Palet appeared in the early 1950s, that context made Wayne approach this relationship more cautiously, even though he had not entirely escaped his old patterns. Pilar was a Peruvian actress, the daughter of a senator, raised in an environment of education and discipline, yet not lacking independence. They met around 1953, during a trip where Wayne was not under his usual work pressure. The connection did not come from emotional explosion as before, but from a slower rhythm, where the two could talk, observe, and then realize they could exist together without needing to compete for control. In 1954, they married, without noise, but with the expectation of a more stable structure than Wayne had ever had. The early years of their life together brought a sense of balance he had never experienced before. Aisa was born in 1956, followed by Ethan in 1962, and Marissa in 1966. Three children created a different rhythm, less chaotic, less dramatic, but not, therefore, simple. Wayne remained a man deeply tied to his work, to long trips, to a schedule the family could not control. Pilar, with her own personality, did not dissolve into the role of someone standing behind. She observed, kept distance when necessary, and did not try to force life into a fixed pattern. The differences did not explode immediately. They accumulated over time. Wayne continued living with the rhythm of a star, moving, working, connecting with the outside world, while Pilar began to seek her own space, not to leave, but to avoid being completely drawn into his orbit. The distance that appeared was not caused by a specific event, but by two people gradually shifting in different directions without a clear point of intersection. By 1973, they separated. There was no decisive break, no clearly announced separation, only a distance wide enough for each to exist in their own way. On paper, they remained husband and wife until Wayne's death in 1979. But in real life, they had long moved onto separate trajectories, one continuing along the rhythm of a career and the final years of life, and the other maintaining enough distance not to be drawn into the remainder of that story. The growing distance with Pilar did not leave Wayne's life empty. Instead, it opened up another kind of connection, unbound, free from the pressures of family, yet deep enough to endure over the years. Maureen O'Hara entered his life very early, when they appeared together in Rio Grande in 1950. From their very first scenes, the connection between them did not need to be explained with words. The way they stood beside each other, the way they delivered dialogue, the way they held distance and then moved closer within each sequence. All of it created something the audience did not just see, but felt. Later films like The Quiet Man in 1952 made that even clearer. On screen, they were not just co-stars, they were two forces balancing each other. Wayne with his familiar rigidity, O'Hara with a strong energy that never stood in his shadow. Off-screen, their relationship was not placed within the framework of marriage or any formal commitment. There was no wedding, no public confirmation, yet their closeness was not something that could be ignored. Wayne's family knew O'Hara. His children were familiar with her presence, calling her in ways that felt intimate, as if she were part of their circle. Between them, there were moments when the boundary between friendship and personal feeling became blurred. At times, they moved closer than what a professional relationship would allow. And yet there were also moments when both deliberately kept their distance, as if understanding that going too far could change everything in a way that could not be reversed. O'Hara was not someone who would accept standing within an undefined structure, and Wayne, at that stage of his life, was no longer in a position to begin a full commitment without bringing along other consequences. Their bond, therefore, existed in a very particular form, without the need for clear definition, without being forced toward a specific ending. When Wayne entered the final years of his life, O'Hara was still there, not as part of the past, but as someone who preserved another version of him, a version not bound by image or responsibility, simply existing in mutual understanding without the need for further explanation. The presence of Maureen O'Hara preserved for Wayne a quiet space, but the practical course of his life in the following years moved in another direction, more pragmatic, more intimate, and closely tied to the period when his health began to decline. Pat Stacey entered that space not as an outsider, but from a very close position, his personal secretary. They met in the late 1960s, when Wayne had passed his peak and was beginning to adjust to a slower rhythm of life he had never truly been accustomed to. Pat was unlike the women who had come before in his life. She did not enter as a star, did not carry a separate world that needed to be protected, nor did she create explosive conflicts. The connection formed from very concrete things: schedules, work, and the small details of daily life that Wayne no longer had the strength to control as he once had. The age gap between them was significant, yet it did not make the relationship fragile. On the contrary, it created another kind of balance, where Pat became the one who held the rhythm for the part of life Wayne was gradually losing control over. When his life with Pilar no longer shared the same space from 1973 onward, Pat became the person who was almost constantly by Wayne's side. They lived together, without a wedding, without official recognition, Yet the level of attachment went far beyond conventional definitions. She was not only a companion, but also the one who witnessed every small change in his body, from prolonged fatigue, moments when he had to stop in the middle of work, to days when simply standing upright was no longer easy. This relationship was not built on drama, but on presence. There were no public conflicts like before, but that did not mean there was no pressure. Living beside a symbol gradually weakening carried a different kind of tension. Quieter, but persistent. Pat did not try to change Wayne, nor did she demand that he become someone else. And she remained there, keeping everything functioning, even as Wayne himself began to lose his own rhythm. The rhythm of life that Pat Stacy tried to keep stable began to drift off course when Wayne's body no longer responded in the way he was accustomed to. In early 1979, during a surgery that seemed unrelated, doctors discovered a malignant tumor in his stomach. This time, it was no longer a battle that could be controlled as before. Treatments were attempted, hope was extended, but his body could not keep pace. The decline did not come in small steps, but like a sudden slope. From a man who could still stand before the camera to one who had to calculate every simple movement. That April, he still appeared at the Academy Awards. There was no sign of panic or surrender in the way he walked onto the stage. The auditorium rose, applause stretching on, as if trying to hold him there a little longer in that moment. He spoke gently, without display, without turning the evening into a farewell. But his presence carried a different weight. Not that of a star at his peak, but of a man trying to remain upright before he could no longer do so. Everyone present understood that, even if no one said it aloud. When he returned to UCLA Medical Center, time was no longer measured by work schedules or future plans. Family members appeared one by one. Those who had moved through different phases of his life now gathered in a single space. There were accounts that he accepted a Catholic baptism in his final days, a choice no one had expected him to make before. There were no more layers of image, no roles left to protect, only a man approaching his final limit. His last words, as remembered, did not carry the hardness the public was used to, but a kind of softening, as if everything had been set down. On June 11, 1979, John Wayne passed away at the age of 72. The news spread faster than any film had ever carried him to audiences. President Jimmy Carter called him a hero larger than life, not as a ceremonial compliment, but as a way of describing what an entire generation felt. Outside the hospital, in front of his home, at his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, people left flowers, cowboy hats, handwritten notes. Without any call, crowds formed on their own, as if each person carried a private memory of the man they had known on screen. The memorial was televised, millions watching, not to witness a ceremony, but to see the moment a symbol left the world he had helped define. John Wayne's death did not close his story. It opened another layer, where the glow of legend was replaced by numbers, tangible assets, and questions no one had truly asked before. When the estate records were released, the figure of approximately $6.85 million caused many to pause. For a man who had stood at the top of the box office for decades, who had been among the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, that number did not align with the image the public had known. Speculation began to spread. How much had he spent? How much had he given away? And how much remained outside any recorded statement? What could be clearly seen lay in the spaces he had once inhabited. The house in Newport Beach, where he spent his final years, did not display extravagance from the outside, yet opened into a vast world within, a kind of luxury that did not need to be shown. Before that was the ranch in Encino, then properties stretching from Arizona to Washington, each tied to a different rhythm of his life. The yacht Wild Goose, once an essential part of his private world, was sold not long before he died, as if one piece had been removed from the larger picture. These assets were not merely wealth. They were signs of a way of living, a way of occupying space that he carried from the screen into real life. The will that followed did not bring clarity, but instead made the fractures more visible. Pilar, the wife in name for many years, did not receive a significant portion of the estate. Most of it was transferred to the children. This division was not only a financial decision, it carried implications about the final years, about the distance between relationships, about what had truly taken place behind closed doors. What had once remained private began to fall under public scrutiny. Time did not ease those tensions. Years later, disputes continued to arise, especially as rights connected to the name John Wayne became something that could be commercially sustained. The legal battle between Aissa and Ethan, along with John Wayne Enterprises, was not only about money. It touched on control over image, over how that name would be used, retold, or preserved. Memorabilia, assets that seemed to hold sentimental value, also became points of conflict, as each person sought to retain their own connection to the man who had passed. By 2011, when more than 700 items from his life and career were put up for auction, a door that had remained closed for over 3 decades opened in a way that could not be reversed. Hats from the Green Berets, familiar cowboy hats, the Golden Globe from True Grit, his final driver's license, scarves, a gold-plated Winchester rifle, a portrait painted by John Decker. All were placed on display, attached to figures far exceeding their original material value. Yet among those iconic objects, it was the smaller details that caused people to linger longer. The books he had read, letters, furniture from his home, family photographs. No longer the John Wayne of the wide screen, but a man with habits, choices, and deeply ordinary traces, things that had never belonged to any role he played. The items that were sold carried away fragments of his life, but the name John Wayne did not leave the space he once occupied. It continued to exist in films that were replayed, in images deeply embedded in the memory of multiple generations, and in debates that have never truly ceased. He is still spoken of as the symbol of a kind of man who once defined America, tough, decisive, unwilling to step back. But the further time moves away from when he lived, the more that image is examined from different perspectives. Statements from his past, particularly the 1971 interview, did not disappear with him. They resurfaced years later, as society changed the way it viewed power, race, and the responsibility of those with great influence. What was once overlooked or accepted in a different era has become a source of controversy. Some people choose to separate the man from his work, continuing to see his films as an indispensable part of cinematic history. Others reject that separation, arguing that the image cannot stand apart from what he said and what he represented. Between those opposing views, John Wayne's legacy does not remain fixed in a single place. It shifts over time, shaped by how each generation chooses to look back at the past. Films like Stagecoach, The Searchers, and True Grit still stand as milestones that cannot be erased. And the image of a man standing in the desert, gun in hand, gaze unwavering, remains clear, powerful, almost unchanging. Yet behind that image is a human being with imperfect choices, with contradictions that cannot be explained through any simple framework. When everything has been set down, assets, fame, controversies, roles, what remains is not a clear answer, but an open space for questions. Was John Wayne the hero America once needed, or a symbol of a time America is still trying to understand? And when looking back at him today, what lingers most? Is it the roles he left behind, or the complexity of the man he could never fully conceal?